I'm excited about this podcast. I feel like this is something that a lot of people struggle with. I always get a ton of responses when I post about histamine, and I think a lot of people get surprised by, oh, maybe what I'm dealing with is a histamine issue and a poor metabolization of histamine. I personally struggle with histamine. Histamine sucks. Histamine intolerances suck. Like, you get a lot of really shitty type of symptoms with histamine intolerances. You have to be kind of careful with a lot of stuff. Um,
Yours is unique, I would say, I feel.
Mine is definitely unique. And I think mine is also, I had a high histamine load for a long period of time, and improving gut function, digestion, going through bouts of like severe histamine lowering periods with like fasting and all of that has helped tremendously with my histamine tolerance, because like I don't really get car sick as much anymore. I don't get nauseous like I used to as much anymore. Constipation isn't as big of an issue for me anymore. Um, my skin irritations, I used to get like horrible skin irritations really easily. Those aren't happening anymore. So I really do think mine is not as severe as some people deal with.
Mhm.
Um, but first, chronic, I never dealt with allergies. Like, that was one thing. Like sinus allergies, I never dealt with. Skin
Mhm.
irritations, 100%. Um, but luckily, I never dealt with like the respiratory mucus related histamine symptoms that a lot of people deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go through this. What is histamine? Histamine is an important neurotransmitter, actually, and an immune messenger molecule. I feel like we've been talking a lot today, and I'm going to jumble my words up here. But there's a lot of different pathways and different receptors in the body. So when we talk about, for example, on blood work, if we see somebody has high eosinophils, we're looking at eosinophil activation on a GI map, for example. We are going to run an MRT, a mediator release test. And what this is looking at 176 different foods and chemicals that might upregulate and trigger the immune system, but also create this like chemical warfare. And within that, and it includes cytokines, mast cell, histamine responses. And so before we kind of dive into this today, I want to ask you a question to keep in mind throughout. Do my symptoms flare when I'm in a higher stress season? Because I have clients that I can always tell stress was their trigger. And for other individuals, it's a constant. And for, other people, it is more ebb and flow. And again, generally exacerbated by some level of stress, whether it's emotional stress, it is a physical stress, like they overtrained, just haven't taken a break, or it is an internal stress where the immune system's upregulated. Maybe they've been sick and now they're noticing that the histamine issues have become worse after this. So this is involved in a lot of different processes. So it helps with secreting stomach acid for digestion, triaging water reserves to keep areas of the body and the inflammatory response controlled. It also, like I said, there's a lot of receptors throughout the body that have a lot of functions. So we look at histamine, H1 receptors. So this is our smooth muscle and endothelial cells affecting our skin, also blood vessels. So this is where when we think about medications, things like Benadryl and Claritin would not lower histamine, but they would block the activity at the receptor site. So your symptoms clear up, but if you don't refill your Benadryl or take that Claritin every day, you are symptomatic. Okay, we'll get into symptoms in a minute. Then we have H2 receptors. So these are the cells in the intestines that control the stomach acid secretion and abdominal pain, nausea, heart rate. So this is what I see a lot of people dealing with, more like digestive reactions, and they also have a lot of food reactions with high histamine or histamine liberators. We'll talk about that as well. We also then have the H3 receptor. So this is your nervous system controlling nerves, sleep, appetite, behavior. A lot of times we'll see some mood dysregulation with this. And then H4 receptors. So this is your different glands. So thymus, small intestine, spleen, colon, bone marrow, and white blood cells. So this is an inflammatory response. And so one of the major effects of histamine is that it can actually cause the blood vessels to swell and dilate. And when the body senses that it's threatened by higher levels of histamine, this is going to allow the white blood cells to move quickly through the bloodstream and find the potential threat, right? So that it can react, it can respond. Okay. way. And this is a really important component to a healthy immune system. But when things are dysregulated, and again, when we are stressed, the body down regulates the functions. And so you end up in these flares. There's not enough, let's say, DAO enzyme to manage the amount of histamine being released. And so that's what we really, want to talk about today. So as we kind of already covered, Becca discussed a few symptoms here, but this can show up a lot with skin issues. So specifically, it's going to be eczema or hives. We can have mood issues, like I mentioned, so kind of irritability, chest tightness. You can have headaches, PMS symptoms here, because estrogen, of course, always plays a role in everything, right? Because of the way that it impacts our respiratory system, we can deal with asthma or wheezing, right? Some of these more allergy-like symptoms, itchy, sneezy, watery eyes. But of course, it can also show up in other ways in terms of like your runny nose, your nausea, vomiting, or diarrhea, like upset stomach. You can have seasonal allergies with this. Again, motion sickness, as she mentioned, irregular heartbeat, and then food allergies, right? And specifically responding more to high histamine foods or histamine liberators. And this, when we get to that section, is why I have such a peeve with people talking so much about fermented foods and bone broth. And I talk about this, and I love bone broth, and I, love fermented foods for the benefits of, the probiotics and all these types of things, but they're living organisms. And if somebody has histamine intolerance, that is not going to go well for them. And so then you want to actually minimize or avoid those things. But if you want to know if you have histamine intolerance, drink some kombucha or have a bunch of kimchi, and you're going to find out real quick.
Oh yeah, I could never tolerate kombucha. I also have always had low blood pressure and lower heart rate. And so I always was like, oh, it's because I'm healthy. No, it was not because I was healthy. Like really low heart rate. From what I have gathered, and it's very individual to people, but like a healthy resting heart rate's like high 50s to mid 60s. Anything much lower than that, unless you are actually training to be like a competitive endurance athlete, where obviously your body adapts to kind of need a lower heart rate because that's how it, performs at high levels. It doesn't spike its heart rate as much. It's typically a sign of some type of stress on the system. And so histamine can, like Liz was saying, dilate those blood vessels, which then decreases blood pressure. So might just be a histamine issue and not you were born with low blood pressure. So we talked a little bit about the DAO enzyme, and the DAO enzyme specifically helps with histamine breakdown in the digestive tract. You also have the histamine and methyltransferase, and that is another thing that kind of metabolizes the histamine down to be broken down. So it's kind of a two-step process. And that DAO enzyme converts the histamine into imidazole acetaldehyde, which does not trigger any sort of reaction in the body, basically. So DAO can sometimes be a helpful support when you are experiencing like a high histamine response. I always include DAO now if I have alcohol of any sort, because alcohol is very high in histamine. I think it's another driver of why I always had such horrible hangovers on top of other things. But now if I want to have a fefew drinks, I take DAO before, I take it the next morning, and it does seem to help alongside some liver supports. But the problem with, the Claritin and these types of histamine blockers is that, like we were saying, it doesn't actually lower histamine in the body. And histamine can actually be pretty damaging in high levels in the body. It's very inflammatory and it's very triggering to the body. And so although, but I don't have symptoms when I take my Claritin or my Zyrtec or whatever it is, it will actually make things worse because the histamine buildup will continue to ultimately rise. And anyone that's tried coming off of them knows symptoms are actually worse coming off of them than they were when you started going on them. Because again, you haven't done anything about the actual problem. You've simply just kind of stopped listening to it. It's like, I'm just going to put a little, cup over this giant spider that's in my house. It's like, you're not actually doing anything about the spider. You're just covering it under. Okay. I burned my house down. So some things that can drive altered DAO enzyme production, it absolutely can be a genetic thing. And we look at this when we test genetics. There is AOC is one of the big genes that can be an inability to break down external histamine. And then you have your MAOA.
I think both in some ways.
Because they both impact metabolization of amines. So your neurotransmitters are amine examples, things like serotonin, dopamine. And then obviously histamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine. If you are a poor metabolizer of those things, one, you're probably a little crazy, like me. Two, you then see a buildup of these, and that's what causes ultimately these big reactions, right? So the gut is kind of I would say the third piece, because the gut is what ultimately leads to the deficiencies that then impact histamine intolerances further. Leaky gut syndrome, SIBO is then a byproduct of poor gut health and terrain, right? So I say the gut is like an all encompassing, but I would say genetic is a huge piece, your input of external histamines. So whether that's food, alcohol, different types of fermentation, and then the gut are like the big three drivers.
Yeah, and I think this is really challenging because there's so many high histamine foods and then histamine liberators, but also, for example, with meal prep, individuals who prep on Sunday and they're eating throughout the week, the histamine level in protein especially increases. And so you might be fine Sunday, Monday, right? But then you are looking later in the week that you're not able to tolerate these things as well. And so what are some of those real like high, I would say, trigger foods? So we already mentioned, right? Fermentation, vinegar containing food. So this is going to include like pickles, mayonnaise, olives, for some people, cured meats. So bacon, salami, pepperoni, lunch meats, most citrus fruits, which is very sad for a lot of people, dried fruits, soured foods. So again, fermented, right? Sour cream, sour milk, buttermilk, sourdough bread, aged cheese, including goat cheese, which is disappointing, some nuts, so walnuts, cashews, and peanuts. And we're looking at vegetables, so spinach, eggplant, avocados, and tomatoes. So again, not all of these are going to be like super high, but they would be histamine liberators, okay? And so then we can also think about anything that's preserved, smoked fish, right? Cans, mackerel or sardines or whatever, all that's disgusting anyway. So I don't know why you wouldn't have that. But I like some good tuna salad, which generally comes in a can. And so you might say, okay, well, a lot of that resonates with me and I can't have a lot of those things, or my tolerance, my threshold for having those things is very small. Like I can have maybe small amounts, but if I, have more than that, I am definitely going to be struggling. Histamine releasing foods is another one. So here we're going to look at bananas, chocolate, dairy, papaya, pineapple, strawberries, tomatoes, wheat germ, and many other of the artificial preservatives and dyes. And so this is something that it's a little bit more than just like cutting out certain foods. It's also thinking about what are other things that are going to trigger histamine release in the body. And then if I don't have, enough DAO, but then there's also, to make it more complicated, DAO blocking foods. So it means that these foods would make the situation worse because it's going to block the ability of your body to produce the DAO enzyme, because that is natural to the body. Your body produces it. Black tea, green tea, energy drinks, alcohol. So those aren't fun, right? Thank God coffee's not on there. I would say that. Becca would be
I would just be on Zyrtec.
Yes. And then there's a couple of unique factors here that I wanted to talk about. So like if you find that at certain times you're allergic to the sun, so you're getting skin issues, that can absolutely be an histamine liberator here, because it can indict a histamine response as the UV light triggers histamine release. Okay. And then other research has indicated that those who are more susceptible also have issues with high intensity exercise, especially in a warm environment, or maybe you don't tolerate something like hot yoga. And then individuals with periods of high estrogen may have higher than normal histamine responses, and a high stress environment increases the histamine level in the body and decreases your body's ability to metabolize the histamine. So again, going back and kind of evaluating for yourself, maybe you've done a lot of the work. I have a couple of clients that this is their situation. They've done a lot of the work, and for most of the time, they're good. This is at bay. They can increase their histamine tolerance, meaning that they can have some of those foods without a lot of reactions. But the moment the stress hits them, a stressful time at work, a stressful family situation, a physical stress or whatever, that they've overdone it, boom, here's the rashes, here's the itching, here's the hiving, and, allergic to the sun. I've actually had 2 clients. One would get hives when she was exposed to cold temperatures, cleared her gut stuff up. She had SIBO. All that's at bay. Now she can go outside. She loves walking her dog and telling me that she's a badass like me, because I walk outside when I'm pregnant, when I'm cold. And then, another one that does have, more stress induced histamine reactions. And so I think it's just evaluating for you, like it may not be forever that you have to live that way on DAO enzymes or avoiding all of these foods, but you have to know to like, what is your threshold? And Dr. Ben Lynch was on our podcast and he talked about that. Some people have a threshold of a thumbnail, and some people have a threshold of a bucket. And so there are other things, and we're going to talk about this, that really impact what our threshold is. So beyond just looking at, the genetic piece here, this is where we want to think about just our day-to-day factors. So yes, as Becca said, gut health matters, right? Especially if you're dealing with SIBO, we can have deficiencies. B6 is really important, and some other things. But when we look at even just our central nervous system and your brain, psychological stress, right? So we think that we handle things better than we probably do. The gut bacteria. So this converts histidine into histamine. And so this is something that if you have a lot of bacteria that's constantly fermenting and overgrowing, or you're feeding it, that level is going to build up, and then you're going to experience these symptoms. So I think that it's just, again, it's important to go back to the foundations of health and ask, what is the root cause that is driving this response for me? And as Becca is a testament to this, and many of our clients is a testament to this, when you can calm down the immune system and you can get inflammation under control, and you can really support your body's built-in mechanisms to give you stomach acid secretion, to give you the DAO enzymes, now you don't have to live in such a state of restriction. And then we'll do another podcast on this as well. But the next level to this is mast cell activation syndrome, which is like very just exacerbated.
Yeah. And there's a great kind of like, if you think about the steps of histamine issues, there is the bottom where you may have a history of histamine issues, but you have been able to control the reactions by basically managing your body's detoxification abilities of histamine. So, you have sufficient enzymes, you aren't overloading your exposures, right? Liz just talked through a lot of histamine containing foods are healthy foods. And, it's hard when we're like, don't eat spinach, don't eat tomatoes, don't eat these things that are very nutrient dense in other aspects, because we're getting at a bigger issue at hand. But that first level is just like, you're managing it and you don't have symptoms. You're totally fine because you have reduced that level of load, whether it's, through gut work, whether it's through inflammatory work. You're good. And then you have a level above that where, symptoms are inconsistent. You, like Liz was saying, you come up with too much stress. Maybe you had a few drinks, you decided to have a salami sandwich, and all of that fermentation and all of that histamine caused a reaction. You get kind of nasally. You wake up in the morning the next day and you're like, nose is kind of runny. You have a little bit of a headache. Maybe you're a little nauseous. That would be kind of, level 2. It's inconsistent. It's basically if you do not manage your load of histamine, symptoms pop through. And then the next level is that you're inflamed almost all the time. Like you're constantly dealing with histamine outbreaks, whether it is random rashes or, for example, I spoke with someone yesterday and she was explaining a lot of the symptoms, and she was like, and then I had collagen, and it's like, when I had collagen, I seemed to break out in this rash, and then I took it out and the rash went away. And then I tried a different collagen and it happened again. So one of them I think was a chicken-based collagen, bovine, and then another one was like a beef-based collagen. She broke out with both of them. For those of you that don't know, collagen is high in histamine. And so for her situation, it wasn't and this is the thing that we need to understand, is that it's not a collagen problem. It's not a salami problem. Like, it is a problem of the body not being able to handle these small little triggers because its bucket is too full, right? Any drop in the bucket is now overflowing the bucket. So that would be level 3. And then level 4 is anaphylactic. So this is like, you have a true allergy. It's life-threatening. And that is, typically seen from, like, people know that from birth, right? There's some type of anaphylactic shock that happens. And so those, I would say mast cell activation syndrome's kind of that level of total inflammation, and maybe even above it. Like, that is where things get really extreme. People have uncontrollable symptoms. They're debilitating symptoms. They might not be life-threatening, but they are life-debilitating. And so that is, like we were saying, definitely something we're going to talk about on another podcast. So,
Can I just add something here
of
too?
course.
So you mentioned the collagen, and I think this is a really good point to make because not a lot of people know this. I didn't know this until last fall. So when you have histamine reactivity and you know that you have a history here, there's a few things besides just collagen. So supplements and powders that have some of these higher histamine things in them. So spinach, strawberry, pineapple specifically. I know a lot of like the flavored electrolytes and things like that out there. The good thing is Bondi Pure. We love Bondi
Love
Pure.
it.
That's okay. It's low histamine approved. High dose methylfolate. Okay, so high dose B vitamins. Let's say that you are somebody that has done almost, a genetics test and you have the MTHFR, and then maybe you looked at your lab work and you're taking something to support methylation in the body because your homocysteine was high. High dose of that folate can exacerbate this, as well as high dose vitamin C because of the fermentation. Okay. And then other things would be citrus oils, clove, or cinnamon, and high dose essential fatty acids, especially DHA. So if you're somebody there, you want to use SPMs to help with calming down inflammation. Those are specific kind of
Protein
modulators.
modulators. I
Yes.
think it's a specific protein modulator.
Yeah. And again, it's because, of the way that it has kind of been created. So if you are taking fish oil and you're noticing that, man, I'm still struggling with some of these things because you're doing a lot of the right things. You're eating a lot of the right good foods, all
Mhm.
that stuff. Switch over to an SPM so you can look at that in full script. But I just wanted to add a couple of those things on there. And then when we're looking at like an acute situation, sometimes we do need to use like an antihistamine, a Zyrtec or a Claritin, but that by no means is a long-term solution. It's just trying to, calm down the symptoms for, obviously not having debilitating,
Mhm.
impact on your life while you do the deeper underlying work off of them, replace that with something like histamine nutrients from Seeking Health. There's also probiotics. I think this is a good point too, to talk about that there's certain strains of probiotics that also exacerbate histamine. So you would want to look at that, again, on like a genetics panel to see, is that the issue for me? Or if you're in a flare, remove those things and use something like a probiotic Histamine X from Seeking Health. We love Dr. Ben Lynch stuff. He's
Yeah.
formulated a lot of these really good supports. And then, of course, the DAO enzymes and vitamin B6.
Yeah, and there is some testing that you can do. So this is something that we actually did with FDN, the certification I went through a while back. They did a DAO ratio test was one
Yeah.
of like the main tests that they ran. It's DAO histamine ratio essentially to see like how much histamine versus the enzyme that you have, and then zonulin, which is an indication of leaky gut. That's also something we see on the GI map. And then LPS, so lipopolysaccharides, which are essentially an inflammatory. Oh my goodness,
Endotoxin to the body.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I want to say like inflammatory it's not a fatty acid though.
No, so it's part of the bacteria in the gut. So you have gram negative, gram positive. So this is actually part of gram negative, and think of like a little antenna that sticks out of the bacteria. When the bacteria die, well, this little lipopolysaccharide, which is meant for like cell signaling and communication,
It's inflammatory. I'm trying to think of like an inflammatory what?
yeah, well, so it's part of, so for example, if we look at some of those gram negative bacteria, like C. diff, okay, so that is such a strong endotoxin to the body that it produces so much inflammation. And when there's leaky gut, it's going to get out into the bloodstream, systemic inflammation, but it's also going to go in line to the liver, creates liver inflammation. And then, as a way to protect itself, the liver says, hey, I got to build some fatty deposits here. So it starts to create fatty liver. And this is what we would look at non-alcoholic fatty liver, but it's coming from the gut because LPS, if it's in the tube system here, the colon, I'm blanking on the name of it exactly. But if it stays within, the colon and it doesn't get out because of the leakiness or permeability there, then it's okay. Your body knows how
Yes.
to handle it. But when it goes into systemic circulation, it's an endotoxin and it really,
super strong immune response happens
yeah.
basically. And so like Liz was saying, a lot of the high LPS situations are digestive related. So whether they're food allergies or sensitivities, autoimmune conditions, bacterial infections, digestive disorders, all of those things. But then you don't want too little of LPS either, which can indicate typically that like the immune system is not up to snuff. Essentially, it's not functioning as it should. We test that with IgG on our blood panel, but in all honesty, I probably would not be someone that would go towards testing Histamine and DAO ratios, I would more so go off of symptoms, because histamine symptoms can be pretty clear. And then it's very simple to just pull someone into a low histamine based diet while you are working on resolving gut function and gut permeability and the strength of the GI system, and the function of it. And so typically we don't test for histamine intolerance. It's just something that is usually pretty clear based on symptoms, and then based on some blood work, inflammation, right? And there are some, also simple supports you can put in place, like DAO. Vitamin C can be stabilizing to mast cells. There's different things that can be kind of generally used pretty safely and pretty effectively. But again, it's a deeper piece, right? There's a genetic piece, which is why we test genetics a lot of times. And then there's the piece of the gut being like the main contributor to the intolerance of the person. And so lower the histamine inputs from external, allow the body to process and detox better, maybe with some additional supports, clean up the gut, heal, seal, and then you're usually in a much better place. And you kind of just have to monitor your load over time at that point.
Yeah. And I think if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, this sounds a lot like me, what can I do? I would go on a low histamine diet, Mast Cell 360. It's more of a mast cell focused website, but they have just some low histamine foods list that you can grab from there with a lot of great resources. I would absolutely put in immunoglobulin. So we love Bloat Eats Pro. This is support for the gut lining. They are also, very supportive of the immune system as well, as they're specialized proteins produced by the immune system. And outside of that, it can improve the gut mucosa and calm down inflammation, but it also binds to bacteria, viruses, and toxins in the gut. And again, some of that into the endotoxins binding to the LPS. And it also can improve the diversity of the microbiome. Another one that we really love is butyrate. So I would probably go with sodium butyrate from Body Bio. There are some, other sources here, but butyrate is produced by some different short chain fatty acids. It's a type of that. And you can do things like butter or ghee, prebiotic rich foods if you tolerate them, because then the gut bacteria will produce this butyric acid. Otherwise, I just like sodium butyrate from Body Bio. And you can do, like 500 milligrams, like one time a day to start. Sometimes I'll have people do that one with each meal, kind of just depends upon, what they need. But I would absolutely think about putting some of these supports in place in addition to, like we mentioned before, some of the DAO enzymes. Histamine digest, I believe is what they renamed it. But there's, several of them out there. And you take that about 15 to 30 minutes before eating foods, especially histamine rich foods. But most of all, it's really doing that deeper work. And this goes beyond, all of this, like figure out what is going on in the gut microbiome, as we said. So test and address that, because a lot of that's going to impact your immune system. It's also going to throw up blood sugars, right? So we want to improve our blood sugar balance. We want to improve our drainage and detoxification pathways, addressing that according to the person and what their symptom presentation, their labs and their genetics are showing us. And then you can hopefully get to a place where you've resolved this. You're teaching the body to do what it needs to do. And then maybe it's, minimal support that you have to do in seasons of high stress or times that, like you're going to have more exposure, right? When you travel, I think about all these other things that can just inflict stress on the body, environmental toxins and things like that. So I think there's a lot that you can do on your own, but if you're really wanting to look at resolving it for, kind of the longer term, it is taking a holistic approach and looking at all the systems of the body and really balancing the immune system.